To judge is a practice that comes as naturally to us all as taking a breath. It's one of our default mechanisms, an instant response to anything we sense, anything that others say or do. We shape an impression and then simply respond. You know, they say money is the root of all evil. I say being judgmental takes that accolade very quickly. However, the plot thickens further when we reflect on the force that shapes those very impressions, the colossal backdrop of our own life's journey so far, a complex montage of memories, decisions, strokes of luck, battles, tragedies, successes, prejudices, passions, perceptions, fixations, epiphanies, and, many of us believe, a spattering of good old divine inspiration from the Creator. The epic of our lives is there every moment in the form of neurological imprints in our brains, collectively and perpetually influencing each and every single impression we form of everything and everyone. It's safe to say, therefore, that our life's trajectory is plotted out and signposted by these very judgments. Judgments that will lead us down any infinite combination of outcomes. And that's all on top of the fact that we are all born with a certain amount of predetermined personality, a block of genetic coding issued to us whether we liked it or not. Coding that has already made us fiery or cool or a mix of both or more, even before we saw the light of day. A code that may have already prescribed to us many of the basic elements of the people we will become, from our physiological profile right through to our temperament, our likes and dislikes, our sexuality, and our instinctual interests. However, once our judgment is made, it is surely the response we issue that determines the outcome of not only how we will feel, but also how the receiver will in turn respond to us. This suggests a need for a response that may not accurately reflect our judgment. Moreover, it also suggests that our response is far more important than the judgment we formed, a judgment that was shaped and perhaps even distorted by the backdrop of our past experiences, as mentioned above. An example: a mother and son are in a confrontation. The son blurts out something very unkind in his anger. The mother's impression is that her son is rude and should be made to acknowledge his mistake, perhaps even be prepared to face a sanction for his behaviour. However, if she expresses these very words as she has felt them, it will most likely escalate the confrontation further. The mother wants to teach her son to change his behaviour in that moment, as well as in the future. So instead, she chooses to respond in a different way, in a way that allows her to connect with her son and guide him towards realising and acknowledging his mistake himself, instead of spelling it out to him. She may say, "I can see that you must be feeling really frustrated and angry, otherwise you would never have spoken to me like that. I really want to help you solve your problem, so when you're feeling calmer, maybe we can talk then." Here, the mother judges her son's behaviour, then chooses a way to respond to him that is designed more towards de-escalating the confrontation and getting the desired response from him than simply expressing exactly what she thinks of his behaviour. And it's this momentary processing from judgment to response that we face in our lives all day, every day. It's the key factor that determines the outcomes of all of our interactions with the world around us. For it is this failure or refusal to think before we respond, to be careless in forming a response before it is issued, that results every day, everywhere, in people of all ages conflicting with one another. We all know that the refusal to reflect on a thoughtful response is a much easier result in the heat of the moment. that instant knee-jerk reaction of the reptilian brain, has always and will always be the catalyst for unrest and misunderstanding in every setting. From all domestic homes and workplaces, right up to the Oval Offices of our world, children, parents and presidents are still in the dark about the potential in thinking before we speak. You know, as ancient as the chicken and egg, my brother recently told me that from a religious perspective, the first sin ever committed was, yes, no prizes for guessing, an act of judgmentalism. It's when Satan, then one of God's angels, was asked to prostrate to and acknowledge the greatness of Adam, God's first created man, shaped and given life from the clay of the earth. It's at this point that Satan turned, deciding that God's new creation wasn't worthy of such merit, and vowed from then on to lead men astray towards a life of sin. So the devil himself carries the accolade for the first ever recorded judgmental response. A pretty grim flag bearer for the cause of judgmentalism, without a doubt. It also seems clear initially that to point out to someone that they are behaving judgmentally obviously requires one to be judgmental themselves, surely. However, we know now that there are so many ways to convey this to someone without being negatively judgmental, and at least not letting them feel that we're being judgmental. In the first part of this podcast, we've seen that we turn our judgments into responses, and depending on how carefully we've thought through the response, we will either succeed or fail in our endeavour. But what is the problem with being judgmental? To explore this, let's look at a few textbook examples of being judgmental. What is it to be judgmental? A teacher points to a pupil and says, "That was a very rude thing to say. You ought to be ashamed of yourself." We can see that the response from the teacher to the child's behaviour was exactly what the teacher judged. There was little or no reflection first on how else she could respond in order to connect with the child and teach them something. This response triggers an escalation in the child's behaviour, who responds with, "Don't care, it was Sam's fault, I hate your lesson anyway." When we look at the child's response and explore how else the teacher could have responded and possibly helped the child to realise and even acknowledge his wrongdoing himself, we can see how important it is to avoid judgmental responses. A wife returns home from work after having a tough day at the office and is looking and feeling quite stressed. She enters the kitchen where her son is busy helping himself to far too much chocolate spread on his toast. He's not even used a plate, and he's preparing his snack directly onto the not too clean worktop surface. His mother instantly bellows at him from the doorway, shouting, "Jack, you just don't listen to a word I say about how much of that rubbish you eat. And again, you just can't be bothered to use a plate. That's a PlayStation ban until tomorrow." Jack, caught in the act, glares back at his mother and shouts, "I was hungry and there were no more plates in the cupboard. You're always shouting at me, you never shout at Jane." The husband walks into the kitchen after hearing the raised voices and, glaring at his wife, says, "Here we go again. You come back from work and every single day you're in a bad mood, nagging at all of us because of stuff that's happening somewhere else. I want you to just keep your emotional baggage at work. Don't bring it home, because it's not our fault." This scene is a relentless exchange between three family members, completely devoid of empathy. And the really bad news is that empathy-free zones like this one described are far more commonly found in most households the world over than households where people actually speak to each other thoughtfully and lovingly. So, why are we so quick to judge? Well, I believe there are a few reasons for this. I mean, it's a no-brainer. It's clearly down to an innate egotistical need we all have to be the one in the right, to prove the other wrong. What is it about our hunger to upstage the other, to trip them up, to be the one to convey the bad news and burst their bubble, to be the first to put our finger on the all-important detail they overlooked, then magnanimously offer them support in helping to solve their problem? The other reason why I believe we jump to being the dreaded judge is that we simply choose the easier route of blurting out the answer instead of supporting the other to solve the problem with empathy and love. It simply saves time. Another reason is that in the heat of the moment, when anger takes center stage and we instantly switch to using the downstairs brain as opposed to the rational part upstairs, it seems to us that the only thing that's going to make us feel better at that moment is quite simply blow. There is much evidence to prove that the act of shouting, screaming, slamming something down on a tabletop or worse is a surefire way of venting stress and anxiety. However, it fails to then address the inevitable fallout afterwards of exactly what we needed to scream at, throw across the room, bruise, smash, shoot several holes in, or worse. The acknowledgement of this damning truth comes to us the moment we reflect on these three factors that drive us down the smooth and lazy highway to judgmentalism. But how does it feel when somebody speaks to us in a judgmental way? Well, put simply, when spoken to like this, people of all ages will normally take offence. They feel patronised and belittled. They feel that the person speaking to them is really saying that they're better than them, cleverer than them, and without their help, they would not have been able to solve the problem themselves. Although the judgmental culprit usually has no intention of making their victim feel these emotions, they will still initially respond in this way. Why? Because they, like most of us, have been taught to flick our default judgmental switch to on since birth. The judgmental response is happening all day, everywhere, and between people of all ages, regardless of the community they're from or the language they speak. The judgmental response is usually the first choice of response too, as we seem to find it easier than the prospect of considering our response first. Most of us are also used to expecting others to be judgmental with us. It's a two-way response that is the universal trigger for just about 99.99% of all conflict in the world. Here are a couple of examples that I'm sure would be familiar to anyone listening to this. A sister tells a brother that she felt very upset by the way he spoke to her that morning, and she just needed to get it off her chest. Now, instead of looking concerned or even remotely apologetic, or even asking her to explain it further, he simply raises his voice and retorts with, "Well, you were rude to me last week when I left my socks in the living room, but I'm not throwing that in your face." My colleague at work told me recently that he loves cooking when he is alone in the kitchen. He feels totally at peace, focused on the processes he's working through and taking his time. He can even multitask, stirring the white sauce while peeling the potatoes. But as soon as his wife walks in, he's instantly seized by an involuntary and overwhelming feeling that she's watching him and judging his actions. She might have only walked in to empty the dishwasher or put the kettle on, but the mere fact that the principal house cook has entered the kitchen is enough to topple his confidence and trigger his paranoia that she's about to point out a key mistake in what he's doing. So a pretty simple equation. Most of us are judgmental all the time. Therefore, most of us are being judged all the time. This means all of our insecurities, our paranoias, and defensive knee-jerk behaviour surfaces and perhaps frequently blows out of the water and into the clouds when we flip our lid at each other. Now just press repeat each morning for so many of us. This issue of the fact that we are, all of us, wherever we live in the world, wired up to first choose a judgmental response, then quite prepared to deal with the often inevitable confrontation that will follow, is what this community support initiative is focusing on during the lockdown and beyond. So please follow us on Facebook and YouTube, like and subscribe, and get in touch. Join the conversation that's starting to reach communities everywhere. Thanks.